Oh boy. We're going to be talking about another Ralph Bakshi film. And this one is something that I ended up really liking quite a bit. Is it a perfect movie? Not really. But it's a decent watch. And for someone of my caliber who enjoys, well, everything that you see right here within the pop culture references, specifically on this side that involves music, well, this was going to be a movie for me. This was just a natural discovery that I ended up seeing. I think I'm going to keep my sunglasses on for this one because, let's just say, every single person in this film ends up having themselves a bit of a personality crisis where things just, unfortunately, what goes around comes around, and all the luck they trying to get ended up being bad until it took 3 generations to get it right. More on that in a second. Now, American Pop. This movie came out in 1981. Which was definitely around the same time when heavy metal came out, amongst other films. Specifically in this animation style alone, where it's very trippy, it's very, very psychedelic. It's got a lot of colors. It showcases a lot of different things, where you got real life pictures and videos blended in. Very vibrant colors. The animation style itself with a lot of the characters is really, really out there, and obviously being an adult film that it is, well, it stands out as its own, which is really nice, along with many of other Ralph Bakshi's film, which surrounds very heavy adult content. Fritz the Cat. But anyways, that's just an example. But this particular movie, now, this is where it goes from here, is that this film goes through 3 generations, technically 4 if you think about it. Zalmy Belinsky. He is a young kid who ended up coming from Russia with his mom into the U.S. to try and make a better life for himself. He ends up falling into the world of show tunes and the whole entire vaudeville act. Specifically with seeing all sorts of burlesque, watching that, how the showgirls will go on stage, sing and dance and do a routine to entertain everybody. And along the way, there's a bunch of other shows that come that still do that type of thing. For example, burlesque, like I said, and drag racing, but that is a whole different media in its own. But still, show dancing, choreography, and a bunch of other things. But continuing on, after he ends up losing his voice due to unfortunate events that was happening within the world, he ended up having a son named Benny, who becomes a very well-talented jazz pianist. But unfortunate events happened with him, thus he ends up having a son himself named Tony. Now, Tony ends up becoming an extremely talented writer who has the caliber of just writing all sorts of songs that will become famous for many others. For example, Frankie Hotz and her group. He writes a bunch of songs for her and her band. They end up going to #1 within just moments of their records. But unfortunately, he ends up falling into the hands of drugs, and he meets a young lad named Pete, who turns out to be someone that he is very familiar with after he has himself a one-night stand with a waitress. And then you meet Pete. Well, just like how I look right here with the sunglasses and a fucking just personality and a shtick, Pete has it all. But this movie alone is about literally 3 generations to where it gets it right. Because the thing is that all three members, not counting Pete, it literally goes through a chronological order of the entire story, where you see Zalamy, who has the voice, he has the talent, he can dance, he can sing, he can tell jokes, he's got it all. But after he gets older and he ends up, well, losing his voice, that was it, and he just becomes a family man. And thus, after he ends up having his son Benny ends up having a musical gift where he actually knows how to play, he knows how to perform, he knows how to do all that stuff. Sure, he wrote music, but it was mostly instrumental pieces, to where he and his jazz ensemble band just captures the moment. And the more that Benny plays, he just becomes a fucking jazz wizard. Like, his performance, his stature, his basic monotone voice, not singing wise, but just his playing, he literally is becoming the next generation of a jazz musician. But because of World War II, he had to unfortunately accept the surroundings and the reality that's going on, and realize that for him, he wasn't going to make it, where clearly he was literally the next generation of, if not the greatest jazz pianist who would ever live, at least within a time frame like this. But after the unfortunate events in World War II, his son Tony, we start to learn about his story of his writing. Some of the music that he writes were clearly, there's songs that I wouldn't say that just come from just out of nowhere. It's like how he's feeling with his experiences, what's going around in the world, and he writes those songs and puts it into words, and he gives it to Frankie Hart, and she and everyone else records it, kind of like a Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin type thing, which I will get to momentarily, of some of the artists that were played and featured throughout the entire movie. But once Tony realizes that his songs and everything were obviously his way of expressing that he wants love and affection, he meets Pete. And once he meets young Pete and realizes exactly who he is, he keeps that secret away from Pete and just gets along with him and treats him like he's his little buddy and whatnot. Tony realizes that Pete was the only one that gave any sort of affection or some sort of love and respect. But Tony just couldn't really grasp and accept the reality, thus leaving young Pete by himself. Now, young Pete, this fucking kid, while he's in his young teens, early 20s, whatever he is, he's got the fucking swag, he's got the look, he's got the charisma, he's got the sunshades, he's got everything of what it is to be a musician. Now, Pete Belinsky, personally, I think it should have been a little more displayed of him understanding of where his family comes from. But the thing is that, sure, the Belinsky family, I like how the movie really goes into detail where you go into whole entire just the atmosphere of the stories, where you see Zalmy, of how he ended up getting into the world of music, where it goes into the next chapter where you see Benny and his gift, Tony, his gift, and then you get to the fourth where it's not really much. But the thing is that all three stories, sure, the movie itself, I kind of feel like the pacing for this film was just a little too fast. I wanted more out of this film. I wanted some more story. I wanted some more background. There's some questions through this film that I didn't necessarily get answered to that I wanted to see. Specifically for Zalmy and Tony. Now, obviously with Zalmy, obviously you see what happens to him and whatnot. But the question is how did he fall into the mobster world? How did he end up becoming where he was at later on? You see all that with Benny. It was just a simple short chapter. I wanted to see a little more of his story before he ended up in World War II fighting and everything. But obviously it was short and simple. But with Tony, I feel like the film was surrounding him just a little bit more, because like I said, it was going into that third generation of the Belinsky family where you see the downfall. And the thing that I admire about this film is that it's bringing in real life situations that happen with incidences, disasters, wars, and how not only these particular situations and incidents played on these particular characters, but also the music scene as well, how that was a heavy influence on these characters, but also fitting into the time frames that were going on through the early 1900s into the 50s and 60s of the hipster into the hippie era. Then you got the late 70s and into the time frame where it was at now into the early 80s. Now, each song in this film, you got all sorts of music going on within this movie. You got your vaudeville, you got the jazz ensemble, all sorts of songs that were playing throughout the entire movie where it was fitting to the story itself. You got, here were all the artists that had their songs featured in this film. You had Bob Seger, Pat Benatar, the Sex Pistols, Jefferson Airplane, The Fifth Dimension, The Doors, Bob Dylan, Sam Cooke, Jimi Hendrix, The Velvet Underground, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. You got Louis Armstrong, Janis Joplin, Billie Holiday, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Ella Fitzgerald. Just to name some of the greats, but either artists or band that were played in this film. And each song that was given was going into the direction of what not only what the particular mood was, but also disasters that were going on that each song was representing, and also going into the new time frame. Once the beginning chapter starts and it goes into the second one, you see how each song is literally going into the order, fitting into the realm, and I dig that a lot. I admire that a lot, especially with the colors and atmosphere and all the psychedelic shit that was going on within the moods and within all the moods and feelings that were transpiring. With all the characters where you understand what they're feeling. it's really freaking just trippy stuff, and it's good, really, really good. And I admire how all the music that was given played. Now, obviously, we are aware of some of the tracks that were featured. Again, I'll give examples: Jefferson Airplane, Somebody to Love, and Night Moves by Bob Seger. But the thing is that it was not necessarily about the specific artist of who wrote it. It was about how the song was used, captivating the dream of the Belinsky family of what they're trying to achieve, like trying to make it as their own song while obviously paying tribute and dedication to said artist, using the song, obviously giving the character their own original story and inspiration that you can believe in of trying to make the dream, but also how each song itself fit the mood and the theme and the decade and everything. This movie itself was really freaking just interesting and a good watch. But I did have my flaws, like I said. I felt like the pacing was a little short. I mean, the movie was like an hour and 35 or 40 minutes, something like that. But I kind of wanted it just a little bit longer because I really wanted to see some more story and everything. Obviously, I kind of feel like the voice acting for it was just a little bit too cheesy at times, where I feel like the dialogue, they were given the material, the dialogue was good, but I feel like how the voice was going on, I thought it was just a little too heavy on some of the accents. I get it with the personalities and where they come from, but I feel like a little bit of the enunciation with some of the accents and some of the dialogue, like I said, how it was presented was a little, I wouldn't say quirky or hokey, I'm not going to say that. It was just hard to believe it sometimes with how the presentation and the mood was, especially with their emotions. Some of the dialogue wasn't really, like, the voice acting I didn't think was the best. It was decent, but not the greatest. So that's the best way I can say that. Otherwise, those were some of my negatives I had. But positives, really good story. It goes through generations of how it takes three people to get it right. Like I said, Zalmy had the voice, Benny had the musical gift, Tony had the writing ability, and Pete ended up with all three of those abilities, where after all three generations of talent were clearly trying to make it into the music business, it didn't come around. But once Pete ended up getting all three of those abilities and realized that he can do it, it was a good conclusion overall. It was a good conclusion for Pete. It was a good conclusion naturally for the Belinsky family without Pete knowing much about his family background. Just very little detail about Tony, and obviously mentioning Benny, that he could have been a musical genius and whatnot. But there were some things with the film that I feel like were left questioned as well. And that was another thing. But otherwise, American Pop, this movie itself is a good watch. Obviously a film that I will definitely watch again, appreciate musically and story-wise, with how you're incorporating real-life historical value, putting it and blending it with the music and everything. So yeah, this is another one of those movies I will give a watch to, definitely for sure, and will appreciate for the things that were given. So American Pop is a movie that I gave a 3.5 out of 5 to. Nice little watch, solid film, and definitely something I would love to have in my library. So folks, that's going to do it for my review for this film. I do recommend checking it out. So folks, ciao for now.